good evening, Professor Dawson. Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is George Dawson. I am a professor of law at the University of Florida College of Law, and usually twice a year I also teach at Montpellier, both in the fall in the LLM program and in the summer in a summer program that includes U.S. students.
Okay, thank you. Could you talk to us about how the American legal system takes into account the usages?
My primary specialty is in commercial law, so I will use sales law to describe how usages are taken into account. The domestic sales law in the United States, Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code, makes usages of trade, courses of performance, and courses of dealing applicable to the interpretation of contracts entered into between the parties. A course of dealing is defined as how the two parties have transacted their business in the past. A course of performance is defined as how the parties are carrying out the contract in question. And a usage of trade is defined as a more general usage in the industry of which the parties are aware or of which they should be aware. So to give you an example of a usage, let me illustrate it by a case that is a common case studied in United States law schools. In the case, a fabric manufacturer entered into a contract to supply first quality fabric to a chain of retail stores. After they'd entered into the contract, and after the manufacturer had begun to produce the cloth, the market for knitted fabrics declined greatly, and the buyer notified the manufacturer that it would not take the cloth. The manufacturer responded by saying, "I've already produced most of the cloth. I can't sell it to other people because it's custom made. You have to perform the contract." The response of the buyer was, "All right, I will perform the contract, but if there is one flaw in any of the cloth, I will reject it." The manufacturer at that point said, "It's not possible to produce fabric without some flaws. There's no sense trying to satisfy the buyer under these circumstances," and the manufacturer didn't deliver the cloth, but it sued the buyer. And it sued the buyer for breaching the contract by refusing to take the cloth. The court decided for the manufacturer, and the major portion of the decision was that in trade usage, first quality fabric, which was the description of the fabric under the contract, permitted some flaws. So when the buyer attempted to say that it meant perfect cloth, the buyer was misinterpreting the contract, and when it refused to take the cloth, it breached. The other thing that's interesting about the case is that the trade usage standards cited by the court, that first quality cloth could have some imperfections, came from the standards of a fairly large textile trade group. It had about 1,500 members. And the court relied on that standard despite the fact that the buyer said in the litigation that it was not part of the group and it had never heard of the standard. But the U.S. law says that usages or trade standards of which the parties are aware or should be aware are used to interpret the contract, and the court said you were in this industry, you should have been aware of the existence of the standard. So again, it was used to decide the case in favor of the seller.
Thank you very much, Professor Dawson.